We talk so much about getting through it,
Yeah.
but how do we know like when to end it and when to move on from it? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Truth Talks, a podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. I'm Courtney, and as always, this is my brother Paris, and today we are here to talk about ending a fat loss phase. Everybody's been talking about, okay, well, how do you actually lose fat and like having a fat loss phase or weight loss phase or whatever it is. And over the last several episodes, we've been really dialed into how to help people achieve fat loss success. But I think the thing that often gets forgotten is that like at some point in time, that phase ends. Like we talk so much about getting through it, but how do we know like when to end it and when to move on from it? And so that's something I'm hoping we can chat through today and kind of clear that up.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to think about because, we have just such a big issue with people being able to maintain results when it comes to fat loss. And also, I think people can become like chronic dieters where they just always dieting, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's a really important thing that we address also today.
And we're not supposed to be dieting forever, right? Like I think there's two inherent challenges with that. Is one is, the state of like constant restriction. If you don't know how to end a fat loss phase and when to end it, you just kind of end up in this state of constant restriction, which means if you're under fueling, you're probably also then at some point underperforming in other areas of life. Or if you don't end a fat loss phase or you get stuck in that constant dieting cycle, it means that you're actually never achieving your results to begin with, right?
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, they're chronically dieting and trying to lose fat, and then they end up having either binging episodes or they have occasions where they overeat and gain a bunch of weight. So they're always kind of dieting, but never
Mm-hmm.
really making the progress that they want because
Yeah.
they're either keep slipping up or like the big days of eating kind of offset any sort of deficit that they're at for the rest of the time. So it's just a really frustrating place to kind of be in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So either way, you're kind of giving up some sort of productivity by staying in fat
Hmm.
loss phase. Either you're just
Yeah.
like not being productive with your actual fat loss because you're stuck, or you're not being productive in terms of moving on from that fat loss success later on, which could be either just maintenance or building more muscle or having energy again and being well fueled for other activities in life. So we're here to talk about when it's time to move on.
Hmm.
Do you want
Yes.
to start by talking about why people actually don't see the end of a fat loss phase? Like, should we dive into that a little bit first? And like, why is this a topic that's so under talked about or not talked about enough?
Yeah, I think it goes back to even like we talked about people, kind of spinning their wheels. So they just keep dieting because they want the results, but they haven't gotten them yet type thing. But the
Yeah, we did that
second,
whole episode on yo-yo dieting, so I'll drop that one here as well. Yeah.
exactly. But I think the second reason is even if people see results, they don't know what to do and they associate the restriction or what they were doing to achieve fat loss as the thing they have to do to maintain the fat loss when in reality it's wrong. Okay. So they think, okay, if I don't keep restricting, then I'm not going to maintain my results. And, I'm so emotionally attached to the result, which I get it. We're excited about, getting lean and seeing, new progress. But at the same time, what got us there, certain aspects of that will help us stay there, but it's not the exact same protocol. Like
Yeah.
my fat loss calories are significantly different than my, maintenance calories or building calories, like just like everybody else.
So are you saying that it's kind of like actually just not knowing what to do or
Yes,
like assuming that it's
exactly.
the same thing? So you don't see an end because you're like, well, an end doesn't exist. Like I don't actually know what an end would look like. So it's just lack of clarity on how to move on from that fat loss phase.
Yeah, and like actually how to transition out because a lot of people are very concerned about I don't want to gain a bunch of weight back, right?
Right,
Because
right.
people sometimes are good at losing weight and then good at gaining it right back kind of thing. So I think a lot of times there's that fear, which I can totally understand, but it's just they don't know the middle ground. And I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just like, okay, well, what does that transition phase look like? Or what does maintenance look like? Or what does a controlled building phase look like? Like they haven't experienced that. They just know either how to restrict and lose fat or they're, eating quote unquote regularly and just getting back to a higher body weight, a higher body fat percentage that they don't actually want to be at.
That's a good point. So it's really just not knowing what those next steps could look like. And so we can talk about that as we talk about how to move on from fat loss phase. But I think within that is when somebody, you talked about like seeing success and feeling excited about that progress, right? I think when you move on from a fat loss phase, you have to shift your definitions of progress. And that's another area where people are so uncertain. So it's hard to say, oh, I see an end in my fat loss phase when you don't even know what success would look like after. And that
Mm-hmm.
could be maintaining your body weight. But when people are constantly measuring their success against like, ooh, seeing the scale weight go down, right? Or continuing to lose inches, and it's only their only measures of progress have been around fat
Mm-hmm.
loss, then of course there's hesitancy to move on from that, because then you're questioning, well, what does success look like? So it's not even like knowing, okay, what is the next step, but it's like, what does success at the next step look like?
Yes.
And without that being cleared up, it's kind of natural that we wouldn't want to move on from something where we feel like we're inherently successful, right? Like
Yep.
to have the conversation around ending a fat loss phase, we'll dive into the nuances, but really is acknowledging that you've been successful with fat loss to begin
Mm-hmm.
with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I can understand the hesitancy to move on from that when you're like, but I'm doing this so well, I'm attached to it
Mm-hmm.
now, without another indicator of progress or success.
Yeah, it's a good point. And especially I find this for people that used to be overweight either for a long time when they were younger or just spent a lot of their adult life overweight. They when they do see wins with the fat loss, they get very emotionally attached
Yeah.
to just being in a fat loss phase, which I totally understand, because it's like this new thing that they unlocked is like, holy crap, I've never seen my physique like this. Like I don't want to lose it. But I think it's again just important to then set new goals, just as you're saying. It's like, okay, we're chasing all these wins for fat loss, but there's other wins we can chase either at maintenance or in a building phase as well. So it's just kind of highlighting and creating some clarity about what other wins there could be, and then unlocking that progress with those ones as well, so you enjoy every phase.
I love that. And let's come back to the idea of like phases to look forward to and new wins to move on. But let's dive into now like some of the signs of fat loss success that could be indicators that, okay, it's actually time to end a fat loss phase, right? So like at what point would you be like, we've done the job?
Yeah, and this is a tough question, because I think everybody's definition of what success looks like is going to be different. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's whatever goal that you set out when you started the fat loss phase. Like this is one way to think about when
Yeah,
to end
there's a
it,
couple
because
different ways we can end it.
there's a
This is
few
the
different.
first one.
But the first one could be if you just reached a goal that you wanted to reach, right? Like let's say somebody comes to me and they're like, you know what, Paris, I have never seen my abs before. I just want to be able to see my abs. And then we get abs. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, like we did it. Like that could be one, that
Mm-hmm.
could be one. Not that I like setting kind of body weight goals or anything. Like I don't really like to say like this is my goal weight, but if there's a specific range that we know we're trying to somewhat shoot for, if we know your body and we know what looks at any given body
Mm-hmm.
weight, then okay, well maybe once we got to that body weight range that we were kind of predicting for that coincides with a certain look,
Right.
then that's another place where we could say, you know what, we did it.
Mm-hmm. Or even like, because I'm with you, I'm not a big fan of like having goal weights, and we talked about that in another episode as well. But sometimes you can have like milestone body weight goals
Mm-hmm.
because it is a measure of progress. So
Yeah.
it could be an opportunity to check in if you're like, hey, we hit this milestone weight. How are we feeling about things, right? Like, do we want to stay here for a while at this body weight? Do we want to see if we can maintain it? Do we need to, or do we see value in continuing to push body weight down? Do we have the look that we would expect to see? Because again,
Mm-hmm.
tying it back into the visuals, not
Yep.
just the number. But I think the goal or the milestone weights kind of give you that checkpoint.
Yep.
That could be an
True.
indicator of having the conversation either with yourself or with a coach of, is it time to move on from this fat loss phase or not?
For sure.
Yeah.
For
Any
sure.
other like success indicators where you can be like, hey, we kind of did it and we're ready to end this fat loss phase?
Success indicators. Maybe if there's a certain event, like I'm kind of like two different perspectives on events. Number one, I think they can really motivate you to like lock in and get this done. But number two, I don't think we should be relying on an event to be the only reason why we want to be in good shape. Like, don't we just want to be in awesome shape forever, not just for the wedding or for the trip or like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think they can be an extra layer of motivation. So maybe you had the event, like for example, I'll probably plan a photo shoot for myself this summer. I decided not to do competition because of I'm actually getting married and moving and et cetera, et cetera. So I decided I'll probably do a photo shoot. So that's like an event where I'm like, okay, let me get in great shape for this. And when that's done, I transition out because that was the goal. Or somebody else might have like, okay, you know what? I don't know, a bachelor party in Mexico or whatever, and I want to look ripped and be awesome. Like, something like that. It's like, okay, well, we did the trip. How do we transition out of that now?
Yeah, I like that. So it's kind of like when the fat loss phase is already inspired by a specific timeline,
Yes.
then you know that timeline is kind of like your quote unquote endpoint.
Yes.
Or transition point, right? So there's a lot of positive signs that around ending a fat loss phase where you can take a look and say like, hey, we did the thing we set out to do. That's really awesome. But sometimes ending a fat loss phase isn't actually just about having accomplished it. It's being a little proactive with knowing when pursuing that fat loss phase is no longer productive, right?
Yes.
And I think there are a few examples, and we each have our own instances where we've like tackled fat loss phases and actually, I don't want to say abandoned them, but maybe stopped them earlier than before we got to that point of, hey, we did the thing. We set out what we set out to do. So do we want to talk about our examples? And we can talk about kind of like the theoretical instances where we would actually maybe stop a fat loss phase earlier.
Yeah, and I think this is different depending on the type of leanness you're going for, because like a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about are not really relevant if you're starting at a higher body fat percentage, and a lot of stuff we're about to talk to about like really aren't relevant, you know, in those contexts. But for people that are trying to get like relatively lean, I would say these could be things that you to think about. And I think I'm trying to think of specific examples of like my journey. There've been, I think, a couple of fat loss phases where I've either ended early or whatever, and it usually based on like certain life situation or certain life stressors that just made the juice not worth the squeeze.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's one you can think of better than me in
well,
my
I can
own
think
journey.
Of, yours, like when you came to visit me, and then you were planning on having a fat loss phase. I think.
Oh, I was
after.
going to start a fat loss phase.
Yeah. Okay. So you hadn't even started it yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you kind of decided not to do that because there were some health implications you were going through, right? And
yeah. So that one I just pushed it back like 6 weeks or something. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so it's like, you know, when maybe there's other health priorities you need to take care of because it is a stressor on the body, right? So that's a little different because you didn't end the phase. But I'd say with mine, I'll give my example because you brought up this idea of like maybe other life things going on. For me, like I've actually said this on the podcast before, but I was kind of like halfway through a fat loss phase when I decided to like leave my corporate job. And so I didn't hit that kind of like body weight, air quotes, goal weight that like coach and I had set up. And I wasn't quite at the level of leanness that I was aiming for at that point in time. But it didn't make sense for me to try to continue to stay in a calorie deficit and train super hard and, you know, hit those targets and deal with the fatigue of that at the same time as I was trying to navigate out of my job. Right.
Yeah.
So we ended that fat loss phase earlier, but the cool thing is like, you can go back to it, right? In moments like that, it's not always like a firm endpoint. It's like kind of like a pause.
Exactly. And again, this is not really relevant unless you're trying to get like pretty lean. I would say like people are like, oh, I don't really get low. I feel way more energetic now that I'm leaner than I was before. Well, we're not talking about those situations, right?
No.
I don't want people to think that like, you know, you shouldn't.
No. I'm talking about like, I was trying to go like sub 120 pounds. You know what I mean? Like,
which for you is pretty lean.
For me is pretty lean, right? So at that point, it was just not worth that extra push. But if I was starting at like 160 and trying to get to like 150, that would actually be pretty heavy for me. And so like at that point, I would actually, that'd be very heavy for me. That's not even a number I've come close to for me, right? So like that would be a completely different story in which like, no, I probably could have still pursued the fat loss phase.
Yeah, exactly. I think the only other like thing I can think about is, so like let's say for example, I did start a competition prep this year instead, and I was like, you know what, stubborn Paris, we're gonna do it. We said we're gonna do it, but I'm getting to those last 4 weeks, and I'm like pretty shredded, and like, you know, I got veins everywhere, but the lethargy is starting to kick in, hunger and everything, and I'm trying to plan the wedding, and it's stressful, and the business is growing. Maybe that would be a point in time where I could see myself pulling the plug on the fat loss phase before the quote unquote end goal. So I think that's like an example of like, for those of us that are trying to get like pretty damn lean, there might be certain times where something comes up in your life that just has to take priority for energy and fatigue. Cause like, if you're trying to get really lean, like there's going to be some hunger, there's going to be some energy dips. Training's not going to feel the same. Like there's no way around that for most people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we're getting at with this section of our conversation is really like, if you are somebody who's pushing to next levels of leanness and there are other life demands on you that need to take priority, maybe it is the right time to quote unquote end your fat loss phase, or at least put pause on your fat loss phase for a little bit to manage those other life instances. Because I'm going to use your quote, the juice might not be worth the squeeze to keep pushing to that next level of leanness.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you're trying to get super lean, the indicators to end and move on from fat loss aren't always just about other life events. Like sometimes there's other sensations that you subjectively feel that you start to face a little bit of like, I'm going to use the word resistance when it comes to like trying to push that next level. And again, as you've reminded us a few times, this is for those contexts where you're trying to get lean. Like you're not overweight trying to get to a healthy body fat range. You are trying to get lean. Do you want to talk about some of those, let's say diet symptoms or symptoms of fatigue that maybe could indicate it's time to put things on pause?
Yeah, and I think this is gonna, like, everybody's kind of comfy body fat range will be a little bit different. Like I know some people who can get very lean and be like, I'm just chilling, like I'm totally good, right? But then for me, there's a certain level of leanness where I know the symptoms, like, just the lack of energy, the maybe hunger that doesn't go away after meals, like those kind of things. A lot of people deal with like libido issues when they get too lean. But sometimes what you need to think about is some of these symptoms that we're talking about might not be that you're too lean. It might just be you've been dieting potentially for too long, or you've lost a lot of your body fat. Right. And sometimes instead of ending the diet, quote unquote, like we're talking about, Courtney mentioned pressing pause. Sometimes a simple diet break where you spend a few weeks just eating closer to maintenance, you can seriously kind of resolve all those diet symptoms that you're experiencing. You're like, oh, did I really diet? I forget what that felt like. Okay, back at it now,
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of framing it. It's like, it's part of why everything we talk about is like this continuous journey, and why, even though we're saying when should you end a fat loss phase, it's not really the end of a journey regardless, right? Yeah. But I like that you're talking about it through the lens of like how different it is from one person to the next, but you have to kind of be in touch with like your own symptoms. But I think the reason that those symptoms also matter is obviously because it makes the experience harder or easier. But one of the reasons those symptoms can manifest and make fat loss more challenging is because it makes adherence more difficult. So if you're somebody who you're like battling this insane level of hunger, and then therefore you can't even stick to your calorie deficit because you're still eating after you've hit your targets, or if you are so miserable all the time that you're stressed out and you're stress eating and you can't stick to your calorie deficit, maybe you should actually end the fat loss phase because you're not really even in it, right? Like if you can't stick to it anymore,
you're not sticking to it.
Or if you're like, hey, I'm trying to lose body fat, but like I'm still going out to eat like a couple times a day and like I'm not even hitting my numbers. Maybe you should actually just focus on trying to hit your maintenance numbers more consistently first.
Yeah, it's true.
And end the fat loss phase, because if you're not really even in it, then
then
it's time to move on.
No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Saying you're in a fat loss phase doesn't actually mean you're in a fat loss phase.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean? And like, just because you have, potentially macro targets on paper doesn't mean that you're actually following them and that your body's that's receiving those as the input. So anyways, that's a good point. Maybe it's just time to learn how to like eat accurately at maintenance, good consistent habits first, and then, you can jump back in.
Yeah. And this is where I'm going to say, like, maybe you end the fat loss phase if it's a fat loss phase you've been pursuing for like 3 years and not seeing progress, right? Not to sound negative about it, but I do acknowledge that this is a reality for some people. We started out this conversation by like the signs you might be ready to end a fat loss phase when you've like achieved it. But like you said, saying you're in a fat loss phase or saying your goal is fat loss doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually working towards it. So I do think it's important to say, like, maybe you need to shift your mindset and say, I'm not trying to lose body fat, or I'm not in a fat loss phase, if you're in this constant cycle of not making progress. And maybe that's a sign to like focus on building habits, or focus on food education, or focus on things like that can actually be productive to allow you to lose fat in the future.
So true. And yeah, that is funny though, because we do, guys, the stuff we hear in our DMs, I'm sorry, but we just hear like the most funky stuff you guys would just shake your head at. And sometimes we do hear some stuff where people are like, perceivably in a cut or in a fat loss phase for like extremely long periods of time. And you're like, okay, like, something's wrong, like in terms of the strategy, like something's not clicking in terms of the plan or the adherence, or both, right? Like, you can't be in a fat loss phase for that long, or else you'd probably be, starved to death.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like if you're actually executing a fat loss phase for, like, somebody told me the other day, they've been in it for 2 years. They've been following this program to lose weight. This is not somebody who's working with us, but, and I was like, wow, 2 years is a long time to not see progress. So it makes me doubt if you're actually really in a fat loss phase. So maybe what needs to end is actually that method you're pursuing. It's not that the fat loss isn't relevant to you anymore. If you haven't lost the weight you're trying to lose, like maybe you should do that. But sometimes ending the fat loss phase is just ending the spinning the wheels. It's ending the program that doesn't suit you, that doesn't give you the results, or questioning why it's not working and actually taking a step back and being like, okay, something needs to change here. It doesn't mean that my fat loss goal is irrelevant, but if I'm not making progress, I need to examine why I'm not making progress and actually do some self-reflection.
Yeah, I'm not going to go on a long ramble here because I totally could about people in comfort zones and stubbornness, but we'll save that for other podcasts and we'll keep on point.
We can do a whole podcast on comfort zones. Maybe that'll be the next one. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I do want to talk a little bit about is the difference between like a plateau and an end. Just to quickly acknowledge it, because we actually did a whole episode on like how can you break a plateau, right? And you talked a little bit about like using diet breaks or things like that. So how would you assess when somebody's like in a plateau versus like when they actually maybe should just switch goals or move on to a next goal?
I would say, yeah, very rarely if somebody's in a plateau do I recommend switching. Like I think those are kind of two different things.
Exactly.
And there's usually some problem solving in the plateau that we can do to just break the plateau. So yeah, I wouldn't switch goals just because we're at a perceived plateau if adherence is good and everything like that. I think it's more just, kind of problem solving through that. Because I don't like the idea of, oh, well, we couldn't make it work, so we'll just give up on that and do something like, there's always something.
No, I totally agree. And I think that's where the patience factor kind of comes in.
Yeah,
right? Like,
has to be. Yeah.
Like, I don't think you should be like, oh man, I haven't seen progress in 3 weeks. Therefore, I'm just going to all of a sudden go and like do a bulk. Like, no, it's okay. Examine your variables. Is this something like that we feel like we can reasonably still pursue based on how you're feeling, how you're looking? Do we still have a goal with fat loss that we're trying to reach? Okay, let's give it some time. Let's make sure we're dialed in with our variables and let's keep going. Like that's very different than just like giving up on your fat loss goal. Like we're not here to say like, oh, there's a time where you give up on it. No, there's a time to move on from it or move forward from it. But it's not about like just abandoning it.
Yeah. And that's, we see that with the shiny object syndrome where it's like, well, this didn't work. So let me try this. And then we try this. It's like, well, you didn't give anything the effort, trust, or amount of time it needed to potentially work, even though, probably 90% of the things that people say aren't good strategy anyways. But yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And I think here's the thing, guys, and girls and people listening. I think it's really important to, again, really have your data tracked. Okay. It's just going to remove so much stress. And we talk about this all the time. And if you don't know what data to collect or how to look at it, then obviously, that's why people like us are here. But I think a lot of times when you think you're at a plateau, like there's something in the numbers that's off. And I think there's like usually a couple of tweaks that just will fix it and you'll just move forward. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I'm thinking about one client example where I don't want to say we really plateaued, but we were struggling to see progress for a long period of time. And that was because we had been in a fat loss phase for a while, right? And I think when you are in it for a while, you start to maybe get a little bit like, let's say like looser as well with like
100%.
You're tracking or things. You're like, oh, I've just been doing this for so long. And maybe you did see some progress for a while. So you're like, okay, I'm good. I'm going to keep going. And so maybe you like loosen the reins a little bit. Right. And I think in this particular case I'm thinking about, this is somebody who is very, very committed to the journey, right? Does everything, plans everything very well. But I think at a certain point, we get this like, this is going to be a harsh word, but like apathy, just being like, I've just been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
And in that point, it's the difference between, okay, I had a plateau for 2 weeks versus being like, okay, it's been like maybe 2 months now and we're not seeing the push we need. And some of that is psychological. So let's actually just take a pause. Let's go up to maintenance. Let's focus on a new goal. And it's different than shiny object syndrome, because in that case, it's like we're reviving a spark so that we can bring that spark forward and pursue her fat loss goals again soon, right? Which we're about to do. And I think it's important to articulate that difference between knowing when you start to psychologically lose interest.
Yes.
Right. And then how that affects the actions you take or don't take versus being able to say like, oh, it's just like 2 weeks, whatever. And the data that you outlined is so important, is really helpful for that. Because if you can look at the data and say, okay, this is how we've been feeling, this is what we've been doing, and we're seeing patterns, you can know the difference between when you're just chasing shiny object syndrome versus when you genuinely do need a mental refresh.
Yeah, that is a really important point, because I think a lot of time when people do hit plateaus, or they feel like their metabolism has adapted, or something like that, from being in a fat loss phase too long, a lot of times it is just the mental fatigue of potentially being in a deficit, or trying to be in a deficit for so long, and then things get a little loose, or an extra snack creeps in here and there, and all of a sudden the deficit is erased, right? And it's not to knock on anybody, because dieting can be hard, especially for certain people, depending on how lean you're going to get, depending on your body and where you need to be calorie wise. Like, it can be challenging, and it does take thinking, and it can be psychologically, like, challenging at some point. So sometimes just take a bit of a breather from that, press the pause button on trying to force a deficit, again, come up to like a slightly higher calorie range, and just kind of release some of the pressure in the piston, we'll say. And then you can come back to it after.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it'll still be there for you. And in the meantime, like, when you do decide to like move on from your fat loss goals, or I'm not gonna say move on. I gotta stop saying moving on. You're moving forward, right? Because like, this is a continuous journey, right? So let's say you do achieve your goals, or you're in a period where you're like, okay, I need to refresh and do something else. Like, there are other goals you can set, and you're really good at like reminding me of that too, Paris. Like, when you say things like, okay, performance goals, like, let's focus on those numbers, like anything that can give you that mental refresh can be really productive in its own way. And I think the main thing though is that when you choose to end a fat loss phase, that you have something next.
Yes, you're transitioning out of the phase. You're not ending your fitness journey.
Yes.
You're not ending your fitness journey. You're transitioning out of the current phase that you're in.
Can you say that again? Just that's like line of the podcast for me. Say that one more time.
You are not ending your fitness journey. You're transitioning out of the current phase that you're in. And this is where people really need to think about. All we have is just phases stacked on top of each other. There's no start and finish until, not to be morbid, but until you die. Okay. That's when your fitness journey is really over. Until then, you are in a fitness journey. Whether you are working on a goal or not, you're still in your fitness journey. I hate to break it to you, right?
You still exist in your body. Your body still needs to move. It still needs to exist, still needs to show up. It still needs to look, well, I'm not going to say look a certain way, but it still has an appearance, right? It still has a function. It still has a capability. All of those things you carry with you no matter what you're doing.
Yeah. So everything is just a phase. And all these crazy transformations you see are usually not one linear phase, right? When you stack productive phases on top of each other, whether it be maintenance phases, recon phases, building phases, fat loss phases, whatever, right? In a proper fashion, using a method to the madness, like, that's how you achieve like these really crazy changes in body composition. Yeah. It's usually not like one fat loss phase and you've got your dream physique. Like, that's not.
Exactly. So when you are ending a fat loss phase, you're setting the next chapter. You're entering the next chapter. And I think we talked about the value of maintenance, right? And so I'll link that podcast below as well. That's a huge one, like knowing how to maintain, or maybe you are, going into a building phase, but having something productive next makes the end of that phase a lot easier and a lot more productive, because you're not like abandoning any sort of structure. You're shifting your structure to work towards a new goal. And I think that's not only psychologically helpful, but also it gives you this fresh excitement, and it makes your fat loss phase to begin with seem way more purposeful, because it's the entryway to something new.
Yep, exactly. Awesome. Stack your phases, people.
Stack your phases. So is there anything else that you want to touch on when we're talking about this idea of like when to end a fat loss phase, not end your journey, end that phase? Mm-hmm. Anything else you want people to know about?
Not really. I think just don't neglect the importance of the transition phases. Okay. I really think if you master your transition phases, and this is a skill to develop over time, the progress in your fitness journey will skyrocket. All right. And I really do think that, and I really do feel that. So don't just take the fat loss phase or the build phase, seriously. Like, take those transition phases, how you go from one phase into the next, and how they kind of feed into each other. Like, think about that a little bit more.
I think that's brilliant, because if we are on this continuous journey, it's inevitable that you're going to have a number of transition moments. Yeah. And if you think about them, those transition moments can stack up to be just as long as any one phase, right? Like, when you think about it. So I think that is really, really important. So when you are ending a fat loss phase, know that it is a transition into something new. If you need help navigating that transition, setting a new goal, figuring out how to transition in a way that respects the hard work you've already put in, and then also looks forward into some new, productive efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. That's what we do, right? Like, we want to be part of people's long-term journeys. We're not here to give you like a short-term plan or just be there for your fat loss goals. Even though we talk a lot about fat loss, we are really here for the long-term development and the long-term journey. So I think we'll leave it there for this week because we covered all the considerations around when to end a fat loss phase and move forward. If you have a topic you want to hear from us, fat loss related or otherwise, anything to do with physique development or sustainable fitness transformation, please drop it in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what you want to hear next on the pod. In the meantime, we will be back in your feeds with another episode of Truth Talks next Monday. Bye for now.